the last video I put up about Hatun Tash, the evangelist, the former Muslim lady in the UK who disappeared after our last interview with her. She has sent a message saying that she is okay. Sounds like she's in hiding. We don't know all the details, but hopefully we'll hear more from her. But it sounds like she's alive anyway, so that's good. So I wanted to announce that because I know a lot of people are praying for her. So let's talk about what's going on in northern Israel. The Hezbollah fighters up there have been pretty much getting their heads handed to them by the IDF. They keep firing rockets across into Israel. Just today, just an hour ago, they fired 11 rockets at the town of Kiryat Shimona up in the northern panhandle. And 4 of those rockets made impact on the city. The rest were shot down. And so there was some damage, no injuries that I know of. But, you know, it's such a nuisance. It's more than a nuisance up there. It's a deadly threat to the people who live in those areas. And so they've all been evacuated. They can't get, they can't go back to their homes. They can't go back to their work. They can't go back to their schools. And they're stuck in hotels all around Israel. And they want to go home. Now, the IDF has been preparing, as I've been talking about over the last week or so, they've been preparing to invade Lebanon, to actually go into Lebanon with force to push Hezbollah back behind the Litani River, which is 10 or 15 miles away from the border, where they are supposed to stay. Hezbollah agreed under the last ceasefire that they had that they would not come south of the Litani River, but they immediately did and have set up pretty massive fortifications and things like that right along the border with Israel. I just put up a video on my locals page that you can go see that shows the IDF striking some Hezbollah infrastructure that is right. You can see the border fence and you can see the stuff blowing up right behind it. If I show it here, they'll demonetize the video, but you can go watch that. Just go to chuckholton.locals.com or just go to chuckholton.com and you can watch that video. But without a doubt, Hezbollah has a serious presence south of the Litani River. Now, there's another group that occupies that area south of the Litani River, and that's a UN peacekeeping force called UNFIL. UNFIL stands for the UN Force in Lebanon. And these are some of the most worthless UN agents out of all of the worthless UN agencies out there. They have done virtually nothing to keep the peace since their inception in the 1960s. They actually, in some ways, kind of facilitate what Hezbollah is doing because they set up bases right along the border, and then Hezbollah comes and fires at the Israelis from right next to those bases, so that the Israelis, if they fire back, risk hitting the UN peacekeeping force. And so that doesn't work. The other thing we found out just recently is that the UNFIL guys actually have to get permission from Hezbollah to go anywhere south of the Litani River. And so Hezbollah will clear certain routes. Okay, you can drive on this road and this road, but not on any of these other roads going down there. And the reason they do that is because they don't want UNFIL to see the works that they're doing to fortify, the fighting positions and stuff like that they're putting in along the border with Israel. And so they're like, UNFIL agrees to only drive on these certain roads where they won't see anything. And they can say, yeah, looks like things are pretty peaceful down here. We're doing a good job. There was a an incident recently where some of those UNFIL soldiers actually took a wrong turn and went to an area where they weren't cleared to be, and they were surrounded by a mob and attacked, and one of the UNFIL soldiers was killed. This is a Irish soldier that was down there. Uh, so the UNFIL is not doing anything to help. They're except wasting money. They're wasting lots of taxpayer money for sure, and they have been for a long time, wasting a ton of money. So that's exciting. Now, what we saw yesterday, par for the course, Hezbollah fired an anti-tank guided missile into Israel. They've been doing that a lot. They've got a lot of these ATGMs. Okay, so they fired an ATGM at an ancient church in a place called Ikrit. Now, Ikrit has an interesting history. The village of Ikrit was a Palestinian Christian village back in the 1940s. That village was emptied out when the Israelis took over the area. The Christians that lived there were pushed into Lebanon, which is less than a mile away. Well, about a mile. They weren't able to come back. They were fighting to be able to come back to their village. And they finally got the Israeli Supreme Court to rule that, yes, they could come home and they could rebuild their village. But the IDF has never yet allowed that to happen. There's some concerns, I guess, they have about that. And there's been a bunch of heartache on both sides about that over the years, talking in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. They've been, fighting to try to come back to their village. The only structure that's still standing in that village, for the most part, is the church itself. Now, it's actually a Greek Orthodox church, and the Christians come back to that church and have services there. They had Christmas service there this year, and so they, they've been fighting to try to come back to their village. We drove right by that village when we were up there to visit the Maronite Christians shortly before we left Israel a week or so ago. A couple weeks ago, I guess that was. And while we were up there, we interviewed a Maronite Christian major in the IDF who is there trying to help the Maronite Christians that live in those areas. It's really interesting patchwork of villages along the border up there in the north, because you have Druze villages, and Druze are a Muslim kind of religion. They don't call themselves Arabs. Maronites are Christians that don't call themselves Arabs. They call themselves Maronites. They are, again, they speak Aramaic. The Maronites do, the language Jesus spoke. There are Jewish villages. There are Arab villages. There are, just all a whole patchwork. So every time you see a village off in the distance, it's hard to know exactly who lives in that village. There were some hints that we were given while we were there on how you can know who is in what village, just by the type of construction that they use, whether or not there's a lot of trees and things like that. But without a doubt, the further north you go, the more there's a mix of Christian, Arab, Jewish, whatever, all kind of mixed together up there. So if you thought that Israel was just a Jewish country, it's not. It's very, very cosmopolitan in that way. It has all these ancient cultures that live in it, and it's pretty fascinating up there. The Christians are a very small minority. They represent less than 2% of the total people in Israel, but there's more of them up in the north. And these Maronite Christians specifically are, they speak Arabic in their day-to-day life. but in the home, and they teach their kids at school and stuff, Aramaic, and try to keep that language alive. So there's also these Greek Orthodox Christians up there that have their own culture that's even separate. It's kind of evolved separately from the Greeks themselves. And this particular village of Ikrit was a Greek Orthodox village, and it had about 400 or 500 people living in it. And then, it's empty now. But this church, they have kept the church up, and they even kind of camp out there. They've been fighting to try to get allowed to come back and live there. Every time they try to go back and do that, the Israeli government doesn't allow them. Yeah, we got told about that. There's some Maronite villages up there that are like that as well. It's really, I think it has more to do with security than anything else. They're so close to the border with Lebanon that the IDF feels like it would be a real drain on their resources to try to protect those villages, and they're very exposed to enemy fire up there. So that's my guess of one of the big reasons why the Israelis don't want them to go back and populate that village. But anyway, the church yesterday was shot with an anti-tank guided missile. There was an 80-year-old man staying at the church, guarding the church, who was injured in that initial attack. Now, this is what we call a double tap. Here's what happened. When the IDF sent emergency services in to rescue that old man and occupy that hill, the Hezbollah operatives were waiting for them to show up. And when the rescue services showed up, they fired again at another missile at the same site, and it injured 9 IDF soldiers. So a total of 10 people injured, one of them seriously injured, and some damage not to the church itself, but to an adjacent building, a shed or something that was to the side of the church. I'm going to put some video of that up on my locals page